welcome to the Embassy of Sweden and House of Sweden. It's fantastic to see such a crowd come out for lunch discussion. I hope you didn't only come for the food, that's also here for the discussion. So, of course, we are very honored. Well, my name is Margot Wallström, by the way. I'm the Swedish ambassador to tell you who I am. So we are very honored today to have a discussion on More Women, More Peace together with Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security. That is an institution that produces groundbreaking research, convenes actors and creates networks, and this I think is a good evidence of that networking and pull factor that you have, and of course nurtures future leaders. And all this is of course based on a firm and basic belief that women, who is half of the population, are critical to achieving sustainable peace. And I am also proud to present the head of Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, the former US Ambassador for Global Women's Issues, Melanne Verveer. Great to have you here. And you are truly inspiring, relentless, and powerhouse on these issues and many other issues as well, of course. So thank you so much for being here with us today. And last but not least, I am very pleased to introduce Sweden's Foreign Minister, Margot Wallström. She is the founder of Sweden's Feminist foreign policy, which is actually part of Sweden having a feminist government. It's not just our foreign policy that's feminist, it's the whole policy of the government offices. And I usually explain this through that there's no legislation or proposal for legislation coming out of our government that hasn't been analyzed from a gender perspective. So the feminist foreign policy is part of a broad package of looking at gender issues in our country, which of course is a way to change our own country as well. So thank you so much, Margot, for providing the Swedish embassies around the world with a vision of a world where women and men are truly equal and free to live their lives as they choose. This is a vision that we take very seriously and work with every day here at the embassy. So, as we all know in this room, human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights. Gender equality is not about women to have power over men, but about us women to have power over ourselves and our own lives. So, with those few words, warmly welcome to all of you, and I now give the floor to Foreign Minister Wallström. Please.
Am I supposed to keep this? Yes. Thank you very much, Ambassador Wallström. Thank you very much, Melanne, for joining me and us for this lunch event. And thank you, all of you, men and women of all ages, for coming. And we hope that this will be also an interactive session with maybe questions and answers. And first of all, I think we were supposed to be at Georgetown first, but we decided that we would organize this event here. And I want first to congratulate the Georgetown Institute on Women, Peace and Security for all the important work that you do under the leadership of Melanne Verveer. And we've known each other for a long time now. We are also coordinated. Without even having organized it. And I'm also happy to learn that you have set up a new podcast, Seeking Peace, Stories of Women and War. So well done with that, all of that. Now, I wanted to say something about the times that we live in. I think a lot of people feel worried about seeing democracy moving in the wrong direction, democratic countries. There are more people now living in countries where democracy is diminishing or changing to the worse than in countries where democracy is thriving. As I discussed with Ambassador Bolton just recently about the situation when it comes to nuclear armament and the weapons systems that are now modernized, and the threat from nuclear weapons. And I think also sort of the development when it comes to exercising human rights and the defense of human rights, and especially sexual and reproductive health and rights for women. And as what happened last week in the UN, I really think it's time that we discuss exactly that. How do we defend the rights of women and girls? So that there is, and of course the threat from climate change. Our whole existence is in peril, and I think that's what worries us. And the dynamics are very serious and bad, and very often leaders, and especially can I call them the autocrats that we see around the world today, they start to care about women, and they care about how they dress, they care about their hair, or they care about their sexuality. And unfortunately that has not been a very good development for women. That care has not been positive or helping women. And the discussion about in the United Nations about a new resolution on conflict-related sexual violence, where actually the language on sexual and reproductive health and care was taken out completely, mean that, and since I was the first special representative, and I was put there thanks to the US, I would say, because at that time the United States of America was our most important partner in fighting for addressing the problem of sexual violence in war and conflict, and they were very much behind setting up an office and making this a particular task for a representative of the Secretary General. And I cannot help but sharing, if you are looking for stories of women in war, I think of this 15-year-old girl who was gang raped by soldiers and then shot, and she was coming to the hospital, and not to give her help to, and of course she was not ready to have a child. She was a child herself, and she knew that she would come into society where these children born out of rape were called snake babies, that would have been an enormous burden. And to deny her the help that she needed and that these girls need now in war and conflict, I cannot even find the words. And I think that this is where women and men have to stand up and defend the progress that has been made in a number of resolutions, also establishing the right to sexual and reproductive health and rights for women. And we have to protest when this is happening. Not to say that it was also a resolution that contained a lot of very important elements, like dealing with the fact that so many children are also born out of rape, and how do we help them, and how do we help the mothers. But this is what it means in everyday life, in all of these situations where girls and women cannot have emergency contraceptives, or where they cannot be helped to a safe abortion that will in many cases save their lives. So it's a matter of life or death for many. And we have decided, Sweden, to step up and also compensate for the fact that a lot of the money was withdrawn from the US side on these issues. So I just have to say this because I wouldn't be true to what I believe in if I did not protest against what happened. And of course, unfortunately, other countries also joined in because, again, they have the same view of controlling women. So it was good also for Russia and China, for example, to join that position. But we have to fight on for women's and girls' rights. Now, the starting point, thank you. The starting point for why do we call it a feminist foreign policy? Why foreign policy? Well, because we actually know that more women means more peace. If women are involved in peace processes, in negotiations, there will be more options on the table, and any peace deal will last longer because it will engage the whole population, both men and women. It also means that we have to make sure that there are women who are negotiators and mediators, and we set up a network, a Swedish network of by now 15 women who work as mediators or negotiators, and they are placed in different war conflict situations around the globe. And this has been expanded, so now there are networks in almost all parts of the world. And I know that now Indonesia has taken an initiative as well, so we will see it also in that part of the world. And I think that it is as simple as that, but we also realized that we had to make it very practical. So we decided to define what a feminist foreign policy was by saying that the parameters should be to check on the 3 R's, the rights, human and legal rights for women and girls as well. Do they enjoy the same rights? Do they enjoy are they being represented? So are they around the tables where important decisions are being made about themselves or their countries? And thirdly, what about resources? Are there resources set aside also to meet the needs of women and girls? And also I think in our development policies we have to look at that. Do we really devote as much money to the needs of women and girls? I think this we have already started, but we can now do it in a more consistent way. Through all our embassies, we work with these sort of parameters. And it is, sometimes it comes down to very simple things. So how come a woman cannot open a bank account in many countries? What about child marriages? We check on that as well. What about the people who come to brief in the Security Council? Because we spent 2 years as a non-permanent member in the Security Council, and we constantly ask the question, where are the women? Are they there as peacekeepers, peacemakers? Are they there to brief us in the Security Council? Are they mentioned in the resolutions or in the presidential statements? Or what about the women? So in the end, you know, our UN ambassador said to me, well, I constantly ask that question, and finally I was thinking, but does it make any difference? What does it mean that I continue to ask that question? And then the whole Security Council traveled to Mali. And afterwards the women came up to him and said, you know what? Thanks to that language in the resolution about Mali, we actually got a place at the table. Not that everything is fine in Mali, far from it, but that was what they could refer to. We have been mentioned in the resolution. We have a right to a seat around the table where also our future is being discussed. So I think we have to keep on, and I was happy, and I just came the other day from Tunis in Tunisia, where from 80 countries, women of all kinds, you know, bloggers, business women, activists, politicians, came together to discuss gender equality in our time. And I think that was fantastic, because it was a follow-up, and there would be also a continuation of these meetings. We need to meet, to share experiences, to give each other inspiration and hope. But maybe it is as our famous climate activist Greta Thunberg says. She said, I don't want your hope, I want you to panic, and I want you to act right now. So maybe not panic, but with both hope and action, I'm sure we can change things around. And I hope we can do it together with the US. I hope that we need each other to work for democracy, to continue, because this is part of democracy. If women are excluded or discriminated against in a systematic way, then it is not a democracy. So gender equality is also part of our idea of a thriving democracy. So we have a lot to do. Thank you for coming. Thank you for everything you are doing every day. And I'm so happy to be here with you, Melanne. And we will have a short conversation here first, and then we will have questions and answers. Thank you.
Well, as you can tell by the audience size, we're all thrilled to have you back in Washington. I want to thank Ambassador Wallström. She gave me a slight history of how to remember her name, daughter of Olaf. Yes. So I have not forgotten it from the moment she arrived in Washington. But thank you for opening this beautiful space to us. And what can I say but enormous gratitude to you for all that you've done, for the leadership that you've demonstrated. We're so happy that the Prime Minister is now confirmed in the second phase of his leadership, and that you are back in place as Foreign Minister, because it does make a difference. You know, it was, I think, a little over 4 years now that the feminist foreign policy was articulated and then has developed this record that you spoke to. And I remember so well because you came to Washington at that time, shortly thereafter, and you had the framework that you announced. And we were pleased to hear about it, but I think there were questions clearly about how would this go forward. And to say feminist foreign policy in Washington, of course, is like, my God, what does this mean? We tried to do some of this at the State Department in the last administration, but didn't dare use the word feminist. So there was a lot of curiosity and a lot of really wonder about how this would work, as much as there was receptivity. And now you've had this experience, and you've not only done it in Sweden through your governmental policies, but you have stimulated a conversation around the world. There are large numbers of programs, and I'm sure many people in this room have been invited to programs to discuss what is it, where is it going, what is incumbent on the rest of us to try to follow through. So you've unleashed something that's really critical. And I remember so well, and you alluded to it, when we were really trying to integrate women's issues into the U.S. foreign policy. And one of the examples of that was when Secretary Clinton at the time went to the DRC, to Congo, and saw firsthand what was happening, came back and said one of the things we clearly need to do is pay much more attention to the sexual violence that was occurring, what it represents. And you became the first special representative of the Secretary General on sexual violence and conflict. So the kinds of experience you got in that role and what you said today, you can see the way all of this comes together. So let me start with what you just talked about, feminist foreign policy. It's been a few years. You have had significant achievements. What are you most proud about? What's been most difficult? And what is being done to encourage and support other governments who really want to follow this course?
Thank you. Well, at first, of course, there was a lot of resistance towards using the word feminist. What does that mean? And I think it's very important not to mystify any of this. It's really about the fact, to me, feminism is that women and men should enjoy the same opportunities and duties and obligations in a society. And then I decided that to demystify it, it was best to find these sort of very practical tools and parameters that we could work along or use as our tools. So that's why I made this sort of definition of the 3 R's. And with that, I think that what was at first some hesitation or even some giggling, about the use of this concept, I think we turned it quickly into something that every ambassador and all of our representations, diplomatic representations could use around the world, because they started by looking at, for example, so what about child marriages in this country? How many are actually girls are married away before they are even 15 or 16? And what about discrimination, systematic discrimination? Are there laws that prohibit women from using all their legal rights? Do they have a right to inherit property and this is, for example, something that was discussed now in Tunisia, very, very controversial in the Arab world, because that is not a normal thing. So they were a bit nervous about introducing a new legislation that allows women to inherit in the same way as men. It's not a given thing. So these are very sort of practical tools, and of course to help and support women who want to run as political candidates in elections. And I think, I often quoted Gandhi, because I said that first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And I think this is what happened with the concept of feminist foreign policy. So now Canada, France prize themselves also having a feminist, at least development policy, and so they start to use this concept. There are organizations who fight hard for their governments to introduce. So I see that it is spreading, and I think we have won respect, because the idea is that when we can explain what it means, what does it mean to us? It's a part of our idea of democracy. It's of course that half of the population cannot be excluded or discriminated against. And so that's where we are now, I would say. But we have, and one of the things that I feel most proud of, I think, is really that we changed the way that the security, I think we've left a mark in the Security Council, and we had half of the briefers women. We actually introduced it in all the language, in resolutions and so on, so that it is, and Germany has promised to take it on, to make sure that it doesn't end there. And also the networks of women mediators and negotiators, and Wikigap, which was a project to make sure that women are also mentioned on Wikipedia. We found out that 90% of all the editors on Wikipedia were men, and that so many articles were missing about women. And when we started to look at it, and we were like the platform for this, but we invited organizations and women to write, to complement. So 27,000 more articles have come up about women that mentions women, and they are viewed, how many million times. So this has really changed things. We've made many more women also visible. So it's still down to very practical tasks to do.
Practical tasks, but important, and tell us just how all-encompassing this is. Now, you mentioned men, and one of the hardest challenges, I think, I'll base it on my own experience, is how you take people, the other half of the population, many of them are still dominating foreign policy in many of our countries, steeped in the traditional ways of doing things, and really don't understand how this is not a marginal issue, how it is absolutely central to our being effective in foreign policy, to peace and security. What have you found are the best ways, because working with men and boys is critical on all of the issues that you've mentioned today, what are some of the best ways to pull the other half of the population in, and what are some of the best communication, the messages that we can send on this? Because it is about all of us and the kind of world we want.
Because, in some countries, of course, this is sort of the negative connotation that the word feminist has, that they think we hate men, or that there would be something against men. And it's the opposite. We say that this is good for both men and women and children in particular, if we include also women and give them the same rights. I don't know if I have the right answer, because I think this is still there to do. We have to engage, and actually in this new resolution on sexual violence, I think also the role of men and boys is mentioned. I think we have to do much more to engage men, but in Tunis, I could see that there were many men there, and they were listening very carefully, because they are also fathers to girls. They have mothers, they have sisters, they have wives. They understand that and I think it starts with violence against women. And I think we have to do much more to end violence against women, because this is a plague that we see in every country around the world, that there is so much violence against women. So how can women play a full role in their family or society, or if they are not safe even in their own homes? And this is something everybody understands, and how devastating this is to life. And I have my own theory, because I truly believe that maybe men are, as a matter of fact, afraid. They're afraid of losing power, losing positions, losing money, and in the end losing love, because they know the power of women. They understand the power of women. Women they have come from a woman, and they know that women give life. So something is also a fear that we maybe have to recognize. And I think they see women have all these opportunities, new worlds opening to women. But what about the men? Are they just the losers in all of this? And I think this also drives some of the reactions we see. I'm putting it as a question. I don't know if this is right, but I see that there is also fear, and sometimes the only way out for men is by violence. And we see that post-conflict, and as you know very well, post-conflict peace comes and there is a peace agreement, but not peace to women. Domestic violence goes up, and so somewhere all the frustration, it has to go somewhere, and unfortunately it often hits.
I think another way that Sweden has led the way is with your leave policies, family leave policies, because a whole theory has now is being promulgated on how men are co-beneficiaries in all of this progress for women and on gender equality. So there are an increasing number of ways.
And sometimes a simple thing, I forgot to mention that, because that's a success. We had a simple exhibition, photo exhibition called Swedish Dads. I think you had it here. Yeah, you maybe started here. Where was it first? Well, and it's a photo exhibition of men with their children. And this has now gone through the world, I mean, in many of our embassies. And then we invited people in those countries, and men and women, to send pictures of their men with children and the stories behind. And it's so moving, you go around and just cry, because it's so fantastic. And in one country, help me to remember which country, they actually introduced parental leave after having had, because there was such a debate in that country about the fact that the parents, the men could not take parental leave. So they introduced the law after having had this photo exhibition, adding their own photos of fathers with their children, and a proper political debate about it. So I think sometimes you don't even know that would have such a breakthrough in a debate. In Rwanda, I remember that it was everywhere. Everybody was talking about that. The latte daddies, they went around with a cafe latte and talking and with their.
Well, it's close to home, so you can begin to relate to how it makes a difference.
Absolutely, and also what the role of a father to many of the women who have actually made it in political life. I know Laura Liswood, you remember, she wrote a book about that, and she interviewed all the prime ministers and presidents, I think it was. And what they had in common was the female prime ministers and presidents. What they had in common was that they had all had a supportive father, somebody that said, a father that said, you can do whatever you want to do, and I will support you all the way. So not to diminish the role of the mother, but that was interesting to hear.
So let's move to the UN, because you mentioned the 2 years that Sweden had as a non-permanent member most recently. I know you've made recommendations to the Secretary General about some of the experiences that were gleaned that you had referenced, and also how it impacts the foreign policy of so many of our governments who are active in so many conflict areas around the globe, and there are far too many for us even to count. But what should our ambassadors be doing in those spaces? And I think you've offered both to your own ambassadors what they can be doing in conflict-affected states, what they should be doing, but also to the Secretary General.
Well, I think it's the same thing again. It comes down to the rights of women, you know, to defend always their sort of human rights and their legal rights. They should, of course, go by Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, you know, the participation, the protection, but also the role that women can play in all of this. Make sure that they have a seat at the table where these peace deals are being negotiated, but also afterwards. They are also peacekeepers to a great extent. And I think it's just a matter of starting to see that women have to be there, because it's not complete, and you will not be able to have a more long-lasting peace unless you involve women. And I think to remember that still in most of these peace agreements, sexual violence is not mentioned. And the temptation to say, well, this is something we should just forget about. So, you know, you don't, there is no accountability for this kind of war crimes. And that's very, very serious. And I remember myself going to Bosnia-Herzegovina, meeting with these women, and it was like 17 years after the peace agreement, and they were still sort of trembling when they told their stories. And they said, the others who were hurt in the war, you know, they lost a limb or leg or something, and they got a pension. But where do I go with my experiences? And they still hurt so much that they were not able to work or live a full life. So it's a war crime. It is a war crime, and it goes so deep into a person, of course, but also to a whole family and a society.
I think that's really an important reminder of the road we still have to travel. And another road in peace and security is obviously the representation, the participation. You have been very active in helping to create a Women Mediators Network, and it is growing. I think most regions of the world now are trying to move forward. And really to answer the question when it always comes up, well, we don't know of any women mediators. There aren't any really skilled in this space. So part of it is to ensure capacity, but to create those lists and demonstrate just how much experience there is. But one of the things I've seen is how under-resourced they still are. So what more can we do in this mediator space? Because it's moving in the right direction. The Secretary General has now appointed several, which is a major plus, since there have been, I think, one prior. So we have a road to go, but we still have to figure out how to move this.
You're right in pointing that out, and we should maybe look at that more, you know, deeply, strategically, and see how much of resources do they get, and do we use them to the full. As I said, you know, our network, the women there are deployed to from Colombia to Afghanistan to all of those countries that are in conflict or post-conflict or trying to work, and they can do very different things, but they will be able to reach out also in some cases to women that otherwise would be completely out of any peace agreement. And of course, in reality, it means we were hosting both the Houthis and the coalition, the government parties, you know, for a discussion about peace in Yemen. And we insisted on them, although we were only the host country, we were not a negotiator in any way, but just facilitating. But we said, please make sure that the women are coming from both sides, because how can you make a peace agreement without women? And in the end, it was only one woman on the government side, no woman in the Houthi delegation, but they had an expert group joining. And they were extremely both clever and constructive and active throughout the process. I think they helped a lot. But still, they had to be sort of a separate entity for this to happen, that women were there. And this is, of course, not acceptable. But so there is still a long way to convince them that if they want peace, they have to get women into their delegations as well.
True, so true. And another issue you mentioned, in the context of it being perhaps the most pressing issue of our time, and that's climate change. And Greta has stolen our hearts, and maybe it will take a child to finally get us to wake up. But it's a very critical place for women, both because women are the most vulnerable, but also because we can be leaders in adaptation and mitigation. What can we do, what is Sweden doing to really push this agenda forward?
I think it is very much driven by women and women as leaders also, or civil society, I would say, that insist on these changes. I worked with this issue also as a commissioner for more than, well, for the 10 years that I was a commissioner, but with the environment portfolio for 5 years and negotiated. So I feel that I know it, but of course now we can see the changes are so dramatic. And it's sad if we become sort of science deniers. I mean, we know that this is an established fact, and we live in a Nordic country, and this is like somebody said, it's like if the sun is shining and you take off the cap, if the ice melts, it's like taking off your cap and letting the sun shine straight onto your head, and you will heat up very, very quickly. This is exactly where we are. So we've seen temperatures that are 20 degrees over sort of the average temperature in the Arctic region. So this is so important. And women are often the first ones also in poor countries who have already lived with this for decades. They were often the first ones to experience this because they were planting, or they were sort of out there in although they could not put words on it, they didn't know what to call it, climate change to begin with. But they could see that one year the rain did not come at all, or it came very much later in the year, or that the crops were affected and the food to everybody in the family. So we are still, we just have to do the things that are necessary, and we have to devote. So are now countries going to buy or develop new nuclear weapons that they at the same time invest billions of dollars into that, weapons that they promise never to use, instead of investing it in new technology on energy or transportation or what have you, to combat the effects of climate change. So I think this is a choice that we have to make. And I think there is much we can do ourselves as well. And I think women will be very important.
And leading in this space.
Leading.